Welcome to another Deep Dive today. We're going to be looking at this interview with Daniel Chandler, a philosopher and economist, and it's from El Diario, that area.
Yeah.
And I think it's super relevant
Mhm.
given all the stuff that's going on in the world right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fascinating how he uses the current surge in populism as a lens to look at,
Yeah.
some of the challenges that the left is facing.
Right.
And it definitely adds a layer of urgency to his analysis.
For sure. For sure. And it's interesting he brings up John Rawls.
Yeah.
And, Rawls's ideas seem to be having a little bit of a resurgence lately, especially on the left, particularly his work at Theory of Justice.
Yeah.
But, I mean, can these seemingly abstract theories from way back when really provide a guide for progressives today?
Well, Chandler seems to think so. He sees Rawls as providing a framework for what he calls a realistic utopia.
Okay.
But it's more than just the traditional focus on redistributing wealth. Rawls really delves into these deeper questions of power dynamics and the inherent dignity of work and how those impact our sense of worth and belonging in society.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, we can't just focus on making the economic pie bigger.
Right.
We have to look at, who's baking the pie, who's slicing it up, and who's getting the smallest pieces.
Exactly. Yeah. And Rawls provides, these thought experiments to help us consider this, like, the veil of ignorance.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine designing a society without knowing your place in it.
Right.
You could be wealthy or struggling, powerful or marginalized.
Yeah.
It really forces you to think about fairness in a completely new light.
It does. It makes you confront your own biases, for sure. And then there's the principle of difference, where inequalities are only okay if they benefit the least advantaged.
Right.
So it's not about everybody being perfectly equal,
Yeah.
but making sure that, any differences actually lift up those who need it most.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, Chandler is pretty critical of how center-left parties have been reacting to all of this.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back.
Not at all. He looks at parties like the UK Labour Party, the US Democrats, even the Spanish Socialist Party.
Okay.
And he argues that they've kind of adapted to the prevailing neoliberal economic consensus without offering a compelling alternative.
Right.
And he suggests that by focusing solely on redistribution without really tackling the root power imbalances in the system, they're failing to really connect with voters.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel that disconnect. There's a yearning for something more than just material well-being.
Yeah.
Like a sense of purpose and dignity in their work.
Absolutely. And, Chandler points out that even when leaders like Biden, Harris, or Starmer try to incorporate these themes of dignity and respect for work into their speeches, it often feels superficial.
Right.
Lacking in concrete action.
Yeah, it's like they're acknowledging the need for a deeper narrative, but their policies aren't telling the same story.
Exactly. Chandler believes that good policy alone isn't enough.
Right.
He stresses that voters actually respond to these compelling narratives, visions of the future that align with their values and aspirations. And he uses Biden as a prime example.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah. So while Biden had a relatively progressive agenda, Chandler argues that he lacked the rhetorical power and charisma of someone like Obama, and that this ultimately hindered his ability to connect with voters on a deeper level and really, bring his vision to life.
Wow. It makes you wonder, how much weight do we place on a leader's ability to articulate a vision?
Yeah.
Could it outweigh the specifics of their policies? I mean, that's something to think about.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely food for thought. It's interesting how this idea of a compelling narrative, kind of connects to another key point that Chandler brings up, and that's the rise of populism.
Right.
But he cautions against, those simplistic definitions that paint it as just this us versus them mentality.
Yeah. So he's saying there's more to populism than we typically think about.
Yeah, absolutely. He argues that, a certain form of economic populism, one that really critiques the power of, economic elites, can actually be a positive force, within a progressive framework.
So it's about challenging the status quo, speaking truth to power, and demanding a system that benefits everyone, not just those at the top.
Exactly.
I mean, isn't that what progressivism is all about?
It is, but Chandler also warns against populism's, darker side.
Right.
When it starts rejecting pluralism and insisting on, a single narrow worldview, that's when it becomes dangerous.
Right. That's the kind of populism that can lead to authoritarianism and the erosion of democratic values, which, we're seeing play out in different parts of the world.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that, not all populism is created equal.
Right.
We need to be, discerning about which forms we embrace and which we resist. Now, this might seem a little counterintuitive, but Chandler suggests that the left can actually learn something from the successes of right-wing populist movements.
That's a bold statement.
It is.
How does he justify that?
Well, he's not endorsing their policies, of course.
Right.
But he's observing, how movements like Trumpism, Brexit, despite their, deeply flawed ideologies, have been incredibly effective at mobilizing voters and disrupting the political landscape.
Right.
They understand how to tap into people's emotions and anxieties, even if it means, pushing the boundaries of what's considered acceptable.
They're not afraid to be provocative and challenge the status quo.
Not at all. And Chandler argues that one of the biggest weaknesses of the center-left is this tendency towards caution and timidity.
Right.
He even goes so far as to say, and this is a direct quote, "The greatest risk for center-left parties is that they are too cautious and lack a sense of agency."
Wow, that's a pretty damning assessment.
It is.
He's basically saying they've become too afraid to rock the boat and offer, bold alternative visions.
Yeah, and he suggests that this timidity has created a void that the right has been all too happy to fill.
So what does this mean for the future of progressive politics then?
Well,
If the center-left continues down this path, what are the potential consequences?
Chandler suggests they risk becoming increasingly irrelevant.
Hmm.
If they're not offering a compelling alternative to the status quo.
Right.
If they're not speaking to people's, deepest hopes and fears, then why should anyone vote for them?
Right.
They're essentially ceding ground to the populists on both the left and the right.
And as we've discussed, not all populism is bad.
Right.
But the kind that thrives on, division and resentment can be really dangerous.
Absolutely.
It seems like a critical moment for the center-left to rediscover its purpose and its agency.
I agree. They need to offer a vision of the future that is both aspirational and achievable one that resonates with people's desire for, economic fairness, social justice, a sense of shared purpose.
Yeah.
It's not just about tweaking the existing system. It's about imagining and fighting for a fundamentally better one.
It strikes me that Chandler is highlighting this sort of paralysis on the left.
Mm-hmm.
This fear of being too bold, too radical, too different.
Yes, and he contrasts that with the boldness of these right-wing populists.
Right.
Again, not endorsing their policies,
Of course.
but, acknowledging their effectiveness at tapping into people's emotions and frustrations.
Right.
They're willing to, push boundaries, to challenge conventional wisdom, and offer these seemingly simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, is there a way for the left to learn from this without resorting to the same, divisive and often manipulative tactics?
That's the question.
Can they be both bold and principled?
That's the million-dollar question. It's a delicate balance, but I think it's one that the center-left needs to find if it wants to remain relevant in the 21st century.
Yeah.
They need to find a way to connect with people's emotions and anxieties without resorting to fear-mongering or manipulation.
Right. It's
Yeah.
about tapping into those universal values that we talked about. Fairness, justice, a sense of shared purpose.
Exactly.
But it also requires being willing to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power, and to offer a vision that inspires hope and action.
Exactly. It's a tall order, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
And Chandler's analysis, as critical as it is, ultimately offers a path forward. It's a call to action for the center-left to reclaim its boldness, its vision, and its connection with the people it claims to represent.
This has been a really thought-provoking discussion.
It has.
And I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about, how these ideas can be applied in specific contexts.
There's definitely a lot more to unpack here, and I'm looking forward to diving deeper into those nuances in the next part of our deep dive.
In the last part, we were talking about how successful those right-wing populists have been at crafting these narratives that really resonate with people's anxieties.
Right.
And it makes me think about what Chandler said about the importance of storytelling. Like, it's not enough to just have the right policies.
Yeah.
You really have to connect with voters on like a deeper emotional level.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the right-wing populists are masters at simplifying these complex issues.
Right.
And they often scapegoat outsiders and elites, for all of society's problems.
Right.
And unfortunately, those narratives can be really sticky,
Yeah.
even when they're based on, misinformation or outright lies.
It feels like we're constantly battling against those narratives,
Mm-hmm.
trying to debunk them with facts and logic,
Yeah.
but it often feels like we're losing ground.
Well, Chandler suggests that just, dismissing these narratives as fake news or propaganda isn't enough.
Right.
The left needs to actively engage with them,
Oh,
deconstruct them and offer alternative narratives that are both compelling and grounded in reality.
so what kind of stories could the left be telling then? What
Yeah.
what narratives could connect with voters and inspire them to take action?
Well, I think it starts with tapping into those fundamental human values that we were talking about earlier. Fairness, justice, a sense of community, and shared purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, these are values that resonate across political divides.
For sure. I mean, it seems like the left could do a better job of, you know, illustrating how their policies can actually help people achieve those values.
Exactly. Instead of getting bogged down in all the technical details, they
Right.
need to show how investments in, education, healthcare infrastructure can lead to a more just and equitable society.
Right.
They need to highlight how tackling things like climate change and income inequality, benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's about connecting those policy dots to the bigger picture,
Exactly.
painting a vision of a better future that
Yeah.
people can actually get excited about.
Yes. And Chandler argues that, this might require the left to embrace a certain degree of populism in their approach.
Okay.
Now, I know we've talked about the dangers of right-wing populism,
Yeah, of course.
but he's suggesting something different.
Right. He's talking about a populism that's rooted in, a critique of elite power
Exactly.
and a commitment to democratic values.
Exactly. It's about amplifying the voices of those who've been marginalized and ignored by the system.
Right.
It's about demanding a system that works for everyone, not just those at the top, but it's crucial to do so in a way that is inclusive and respectful and ultimately unifying.
It sounds like a tightrope walk, to be honest.
It is.
Trying to balance this need for boldness and a willingness to challenge the status quo with, a commitment to democratic principles and inclusivity.
It is a tightrope walk, but I think Chandler's analysis offers a really valuable roadmap.
Okay.
It's a call to action for the left to reclaim its agency, its vision, and its connection with the people.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly thought-provoking.
It has.
I feel like I have a much better understanding of the challenges facing the left and some potential paths forward.
Yeah, it's a complex and evolving landscape, for sure.
It is.
But I think Chandler's insights offer a lot for us to consider as we navigate these turbulent times.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating and insightful conversation. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this episode as thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world. Hello, if you are listening to this, you may not be subscribed to the channel. Activate the bell so that you will be notified when there is a new story, and share it with the people you want. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.